Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Governor.
So thank you for joining us. Appreciate you being here. Last month, many of you joined us joined with local, state, and tribal and federal agency administrators to receive updates on fire season preparedness and agency readiness. I was pleased to hear the reports from our partners across the board, from the Montana National Guard to the Department of Environmental Quality to DNRC and all of our firefighters, as well as our federal partners that we stand ready to support this season's firefighting and our wildfire response this season across the state. As I said then, government's chief responsibility is public safety, and that's where our focus is going to be. And it's important that we gather here today to first prepare, to collaborate, and again, unify in our commitment to protecting our people, communities, and lands. But first off, I want to thank our courageous wildland firefighters. These men and women brave long hours, rugged terrain, hot temperatures, and time away from family. Their untold sacrifices cannot be calculated in dollars spent or acres burned. They do all they can to keep us safe, and we must return the favor by doing all we can to keep them safe as well. While we cannot control the weather, we can take steps to mitigate the risk of severe wildfires by continuing to focus on two things. This has been our strategy from day one. First, initial aggressive attack on all fires while keeping in mind the safety of our firefighters. And secondly, prevention through active forest management. With every fire, we must respond with one goal, to put out the fire as safely and quickly as possible. Regardless of where a fire starts, we must apply the same operating principle of aggressive attack. And I should note that aggressive initial attack is not sufficient. We must pursue a policy of aggressive attack on all fires until they are extinguished, so long as firefighter safety is not at risk. The smaller the fire is, the fewer resources are needed to contain it and then extinguish it. Last year, I'm proud of the track record at DNRC. We safely kept 96% of our fires in our direct protection to 10 acres or less. Let's continue to work together to suppress these fires and protect the public. So far in 2024, nearly all of the 400 wildfires we've had so far this calendar year in Montana have been human caused. We can and must do better, and it's the responsibility of every Montanan and visitor to our state to do their part to prevent these wildfires. The best way we can support wildland firefighters and mitigate risks to their health is by preventing a wildfire from starting in the first place. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Matt to kick off our briefing.
Well, good morning, Governor. Again, thank you for the invite. We appreciate you being here this morning to talk wildfire preparedness and really take in the wildfire outlook for the rest of the summer months here. Governor, as you mentioned, to date, the 405 wildfires have burned 5,262 acres, which is a little less relative to activity than we see in years past, but that's okay. That's allowed us to focus specifically on training over the last few months. Just this last month in June, we completed our first statewide training academy, where we had 190 students in 9 wildland fire courses, ranging from basic wildland firefighter to initial attack incident commander. Our wildland fire preparedness efforts are wrapping up here in the next few weeks. To date, we've provided over 150 classes to nearly 1,300 students across the state, with the focus being on state, local government, and volunteer firefighters and their ability to provide safe, effective response in our communities. Already this year, from the state of Montana, firefighters have supported the states of Virginia, West Virginia, New Mexico, and this provides valuable experience to better prepare them to fight fires right here in Montana. I'd like to highlight wildfire awareness, that it's not just a task for wildfire responders. We also need citizens across Montana to take time and prepare for the potential impacts of wildfires this summer. They can visit mtfireinfo.org to learn how to prepare their properties and themselves as well as request a fire professional to come conduct a home risk assessment for them. But moving on to why we're here today, Governor, the wildland fire outlook for the rest of the summer. I'd like to introduce Dan Borsum, a meteorologist from the Northern Rockies Coordination Center and the Predictive Services Center. Dan plays a vital role in keeping wildland firefighters up to speed as it relates to current fuel conditions and climate conditions across the state that influence fire behavior. Dan, thanks for joining us today and looking forward to the outlook for the summer.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, Dan.
Well, thank you, and looking forward to giving this briefing today. So, and I really do appreciate this opportunity to give this presentation. It's been given to a number of firefighters across the state, lots of agencies and things like that, just so everybody's on the same page, what we're expecting. Again, thanks to the Montana DNRC for allowing me to be here today. So thank you, Governor, for the opportunity. So what are we starting off with? And it's kind of a similar theme to what we saw last year. We started off last year with drought in the western end of the state. That was the primary source of our focus. And then we are getting this event. It's really hard to talk about fire when you're seeing the weather like you saw yesterday out in the area. And that's going to have a little bit of a buffer. Don't think it changes the story at all, but at least it probably buys us a few weeks into July before we really see fire season kicking up. Over the winter, the snowpack, or the lack of it, was one of the main stories that a lot of people discussed, and that was due to an El Nino ocean pattern. We're losing that ocean pattern right now. It's going into a La Nina pattern by August, and that flip compares to a few years that we can reference, but not all of them fit. And there's another reason why, with the way the jet stream is going to come across the Pacific. The official forecast is for July through September being warmer than normal and drier than normal. And that's obviously a source of concern anytime you're looking towards fire. However, when everything's added up and what we're looking at, we're expecting what would be a normal fire season for Montana. But I certainly think that means more acreage than last year, because last year was a relatively subdued season. We shut the season off hard by August 22nd, and I think we'll certainly see a more prolonged fire season. And at least in the region, our neighbors in Idaho are suffering more drought in northern Idaho, so that's one of the areas we expect the fires to be more resistant to control in the landscape. I am going to review last year a little bit because I think it's a good reference point to start with. We were seeing a very hot July, getting ready to finish out the month, and the drought was in place in similar areas, so we expanded at that point in time the area of concern for significant wildland fire activity to include even the Helena area. And then one of the real reasons we were concerned was May was really exceptionally hot last year. It melted out the snow very rapidly, and we were left with a landscape where we thought the growing season was going to kick in. So that's what the drought was looking like. You'll notice a little bit later in the presentation, it's going to be very similar to what we're seeing this year. Now there's the numbers that we actually produced in Missoula over the course of the month. They only had 14 hundredths moisture in the month of July, which is low, exceptionally low. And then by about the 18th, we started seeing 95, 100-degree temperatures very consistently. And when we get one of those heat waves, usually fire activity does follow. And about the 18th of the month, we started picking up one large fire about every 3 to 4 days in the western part of the state. And then at the end of that heat snap, we started picking up about 4 fires per day. So things were escalating quickly. Activity everybody was getting very busy in that July 30th to August 1st window. And then the calendar turned to August. And what happened is we had 2 really strong surges of monsoon moisture. And it's going to be a key word for this summer, monsoon moisture. August 5th through the 6th really dampened everything. All those fires that had popped up the 30th through the 1st of August stayed within their footprint at that point for the rest of the summer. And then we got the remnants of Hurricane Hillary with a secondary surge of monsoon moisture August 20th through the 22nd. And that basically ended fire season. We really did not pick up another large fire after that date throughout the summer. Now, there's one thing I want to point out, though. Even though the August 5th through 6th window dampened a lot of the activity, our most significant wildfire in Montana of the year was the River Road East Fire, where we destroyed 64 structures And that occurred in that in-between window between the two monsoons. So even though things can be improving, not everybody's going to see things equally at the same time. Yeah. So, where are we now? And were there any other recollections from last season that, anybody wanted me to discuss?
That's a good overview.
Okay, thank you. So, where are we now? Again, drought signals western end of the state, didn't have to change those slides practically. The El Nino winter was a major story with the weak snowpack. A lot of the firefighters were reaching out to me saying, man, this is going to be it, isn't it? And it's like, now hold on. Thank goodness we picked up the spring moisture we have. May was a pretty fair month for a lot of areas. There's an area east of the divide that's concerned, and even the weather system we're getting, with the cooler temperatures, with the persistent moisture, it does let the moisture get in the ground as opposed to thunderstorms and wind behind them. And so the only spot that did not do great the last month has been east of the Continental Divide. So there's the current drought monitor. Looks awfully the same. And again, it covers a lot of the western end of the state. A couple areas that catch my attention are the expansion of drought into southwest Montana. So there's more areas that are prone. And then there's a persistent area of dryness for, say, that Fallon and Carter counties on the eastern end of the state of North Dakota. Don't like to see it when the grasslands are like that because they can get some pretty large fires. But this map was based on the data which would have frozen last Tuesday. A new map will be produced, which will capture this storm system. So I do expect this picture to change slightly for the more favorable. The projections have been, though, for expansion of drought into a lot of areas, basically to fill in the map across western Montana. Our neighbors in the Pacific Northwest are going through a drying process, are already picking up some large fires. The area of interest to me on this map also is New Mexico. They evacuated towns yesterday in New Mexico, very large fires down there. And they're expecting a very weak monsoon based on all the ocean pattern changes. And I think that lack of monsoon may be one of the reasons we could see a warmer and drier summer, because if we're not getting the monsoon moisture, we're not getting a break with the higher humidity, we may not pick up the cloud cover. When I talk about the drought, I like to always point to how much moisture is actually missing on the landscape. And for the western end of the state, there's a lot of places that are missing 4 to 8 inches of moisture over the last 2 years, and that's substantial. It's affecting the water tables, the groundwater. The grasses, events like we've just had, they're going to help the short term. The grasses aren't going to be dry out quite as quickly, but if we do get those heat waves, I don't know where the larger vegetation is going to be able to draw the moisture from. So it's kind of a warning sign that there can be a real breaker switch, that all of a sudden if we get the heat wave, we're in trouble. The opposite problem, though, has gone on in the central part of the state. The last couple of years have been very generous, 4 to 8 inches of moisture to the surplus, if not more. And while that is a really good sign, it means abundant grass crops are going. So it's always one of those concerns where we can get problems in multiple areas, and that's something we're keeping an eye on. I will talk about the snowpack, and it's kind of an interesting iteration. This is where we were on May 1st. We always freeze it at some point in the spring because if you go too late in the spring, you're starting to lose snow in the lower basins, and it's not a coherent picture. But nobody was really well above 70% snowpack. So that's obviously a concern that you just are not charging that battery in the mountains. The interesting thing, though, is what happened in May. Last year, the snowpack blew out. It was gone by about May 18th. This year, a number of the Pend Oreille Basin and even the Missouri headwaters are holding on to the moisture just a little bit better. So again, that's something on the front end of fire season that keeps it from just picking up and going in July, and maybe we've got a little bit of additional more time to get everybody ready. The last 30 days, the fact that we've been what I would call the normalish colors for northwest Montana, for southern Montana, those have been good things because May and June are our big months. And if we're near normal moisture, somewhere between 3 to 4 inches of moisture have been received a lot of places. The spot that's suffering in the lee of the Rockies, Great Falls, Lewistown, Havre. Again, one of these maps I wish I could have waited until tomorrow to produce because it's getting it right now with the rainfall. The expected forecast does play into my thinking a little bit when I share these projections for the Northern Rocky fire season. We are expecting still somewhere today for some of those areas east of the divide to pick up another half inch of moisture, again, more charging to the more of a buffer. And we're not quite done in the weather pattern. We've got additional systems that are going to come through and generate some moisture. And I did definitely want to address this because it was a topic last summer about the smoke and how it was impacting people's recreation out there. The spring patterns have been very favorable for Canada. They have much less fire activity. It's very likely that we're not going to see a lot of smoke come down from Canada, at least for the next month and a half. Unfortunately, as of yesterday, California and New Mexico are starting to break out some larger fires. So our smoke maybe could be coming from further south and west. However, that usually comes in as a high elevation smoke and not the choking low elevation smoke like was disrupting recreation last year. So now that I've already painted the picture for what's happened, I'm going to use a little bit of some of the forecast information that we've got. So the snowpack was a consideration. The information about the El Nino La Nina has been filtered using what we call the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. That tracks the El Nino La Nina is towards the equator. Pacific Decadal Oscillation is further north in the Pacific. And it kind of helps us get an idea where the jet stream is going to come into the western North American continent. And with that summer outlook leaning drier than warmer than normal, we could see less monsoon activity. And I do think one important thing to stress is the likelihood that we're going to see a hard shut-off in the middle of August is not going to happen this year. So people do need to be prepared for thinking about living with fire season into September. And so when I use the word normal, these are the numbers that I'm talking about. Median over the last 10 years has been 2,637 fires for about 179,000 acres. Average is considerably higher, driven by some years with some million-acre fires, so that's 3,077 for 470,000 acres. Last year, and I think this is an important point, and this is using Northern Rockies statistics, not just Montana, so I do apologize for that. 2,400 fires for 138,000 acres. Really low numbers last year. So people who perceived that we didn't have much of a fire season were right. And even if we were to double that, statistically, we're still pretty close to normal. So that's one of the things to consider. 8 to 14 day forecast, I'm sharing just briefly to show we're not just setting up into that strong, massive, hot heat wave. That's actually being restricted to the eastern part of the country and down into the Great Basin. So we're not into our hard part of summer yet. This is an overview of the El Nino La Nina pattern. The real reason I showed this chart was to indicate that we're doing this flip from El Nino to La Nina. La Nina's in blue, going in the middle of summer. And there are the other years that this happened recently. Those years were 1995, 2010, and 2016. None of those years were large acreage years for the Northern Rockies. So that is one piece of comforting information that there's a tendency to not do large fire seasons during the El Nino La Nina flip. Now, when I take the El Nino La Nina data and combine it with the information we know about the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, showing a negative index for this year, and now I've gotten into the weeds of the science, so this may not be everybody's comfort zone. But basically, we can do some pattern matching. So we took the 95 and 2010 patterns, kicked out 2016 because it was a wrong phase of that decadal oscillation, and we end up with a hypothetical pattern for what we'll see for a large part of the summer versus what we saw last summer, which is on the right-hand side. Last summer, the upper level ridge was able to get into Montana. It drove that heat wave at the end of July. This summer, there's a stronger tendency for the jet stream to be maintained, pushing into the Pacific Northwest. And while you would think that would necessarily maybe make us cooler during the summer months, it's the suppression of the monsoon that may have a reverse effect. And also a little bit suspicious it may let a few more wind events into the area. There's the seasonal outlook. It is for warmer than normal and drier than normal conditions across the Northern Rockies, of course, right away, combined with drought, that becomes a signal you're worried about for fire seasons. So the official outlook is for us in the Northern Rockies, in particular Montana. Montana has no areas that are painted with normal, or above normal, excuse me. We're just saying normal. However, that can be still almost 100,000 acres more than we saw last year. So I'm not saying nothing's going to happen. Definitely we'll have fire. We'll have a normal fire season. Around the country, California is actually breaking out large fires right now, even though they've got projections of below normal activity. Was hoping that was going to let us get more resources early. That was one of the stories from last year. I'm not as confident about that anymore. New Mexico and the Great Basin are two of the areas along the Pacific Northwest that will start popping up. Closer to Montana and also our neighbors over in Idaho, through the month of July, we're expecting normal throughout the region. Idaho starts picking up with above normal activity in August and September. And as always, we'll be updating this month by month to see if there's any parts of Montana that get our concern. I do want to stress though, when we talk about a normal fire season, fires do happen. And while 2016 wasn't one of the favorite years, as much as 95 and 2010, it still serves a lesson that we had nothing going on through the month of July. Get to the very end, and when do we have our first large fire? It's Roaring Lion Fire down by Hamilton. We lost homes, very significant wildfire. And that's, you don't get a warning that they're getting slightly bigger. So people, as was stressed in your message, Governor, need to know how to protect themselves, have their evacuation plans. They can avoid being part of the problem. So summarizing everything, normal season expected for significant wildland fire activity in Montana. Northwest Montana has the highest potential in the state, but it hasn't quite crossed the threshold for me to put them into the above normal. Regardless, definitely more fire activity, given that we only had 133,000 acres in the Northern Rockies last year. 25% more acreage is an easy estimate, if not even more than that. That means people are going to notice it more. And significant fires do occur in normal fire years. And so while we may have this buffer to keep us from raging into fire season in July, certainly expect us to be living with it in September. And that's the message I have today, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Dan. Thank you for your service and appreciate that update. Director, did you have some comments you were going to make?
I don't, Governor.
Okay.
Didn't know if you had any questions on the briefing, or if not.
I think so. Really, summary, I think you did a great job. We're normal to the extent that normal still means we're going to burn hundreds of thousands of acres.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And that's why everybody gets ready the same way every year, because regardless, we know there will be fire out there.
Okay. And you're available to give us updates on this forecast as we move through the summer?
Yes.
Great. Well, that'll be helpful to us as we prepare. So as we heard today, we're expecting a normal fire season, which still means thousands of acres and thousands of fires and hundreds of thousands of acres will burn. With a normal fire season, there still is the potential for very large fires. So we have to be prepared, and I just encourage all Montanans to do their part to prepare their homes, their families, safe evacuation routes, fuel reduction on their properties. Thanks to our recent investments through House Bill 883, we nearly doubled the cap on our fire suppression fund. So we're ready at the state for this fire season. With these resources on hand, DNRC stands ready to fight fire wherever it occurs under our jurisdiction. But we also have a responsibility to prevent human-caused fires. And that's really the job of every Montanan. So please recreate safely, secure the chains on your trailers as you're hauling the boats to the lake or campers to the campgrounds, and make sure your family and home are ready for wildfire season. And we have resources at DNRC to help in that regard. If you're not sure exactly the correct procedures, please visit mtfireinfo.org. It's a great resource for homeowners, landowners, if you're just going to be out recreating, to get suggestions on what to do. The better prepared we are, the safer and more effective our firefighters can be. Together, we can keep our loved ones, firefighters, and communities safe by reducing the risk of wildfire. So with that, thank you again, Dan, for your presentation and this forecast. Thank everyone for joining us today. Be safe out there.
Thank you, Governor. Appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much.